I fell asleep amid the flowers for a couple of hours on a beautiful day. Daydream, I dream of you amid the flowers.
Welcome to the Frame Flower Podcast. This is episode number 37. I'm joined by a legend for sure. I'm joined by Sinister Monopoly. Thank you for joining me.
What's up, dude? I'm really stoked to be on here. I'm glad we our paths crossed each other, and we are today, dude. It's I think what you're doing is interesting, and some of the stories that you have to tell, I think, are really cool. So I'm definitely stoked to participate, man. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I really appreciate you and you lending me some of your time and engaging with me. So I first heard about you because I put out the first episode of the Trap Tree series that I put out, and there's some similarities actually with that dude's story. His name's Jimmy Cornwallier. But I had like 3 people comment below like Sinister Monopoly. Like you definitely need to like check out Sinister Monopoly.
Huh?
It's so yeah. So you're definitely. I mean, you're
people
definitely,
are starting to kind of hear more about my background.
Yeah. When did you get out of prison, by the way?
So I was released. It was probably about 2 years ago now. So I guess it was probably 2000. I'm thinking 2019.
So pretty recently, right? Like, I mean,
yeah.
And so your story's still kind of getting out there a little bit. I mean, it's on YouTube. There's tons of videos on you and stuff. But wow. Okay. So let's just start at the beginning. So you grew up in Manhattan Beach in LA, right?
Right. Yes.
What was your first introduction to cannabis?
Yeah. So I grew up in California. It's similar to like even it's interesting because the movie Blow, Johnny Depp's character, George, he lived in Manhattan Beach as well. And in the very beginning, it states that he's Manhattan Beach. So my family moved here in like before I was like even 1 year old, right? So I kind of started, I guess, with a neighbor that lived on my block. He was older than I was, and he was already in high school and already kind of like smoking and stuff like that. And I think I was kind of maybe just getting into high school. And because we lived on the same block, like I would go to his house after school and we would smoke, and then we just kind of got into things. And so eventually, even like one of my first parts into like getting involved with the selling of cannabis was I gave this person money to go and buy it, and then they would sell it and then like cut me in on the profits. So in the beginning, I was just a person like funding a dope dealer, right? So that was kind of an interesting start.
Wow. So I mean, that's pretty interesting, actually. So you're kind of funding someone, typically, people that like start, selling a lot of times, right? There's those people, there's tons of people that have done this before, they sell just to smoke for free, right? Like they just want to smoke.
Totally. A lot of people do.
Yeah. And then like as time goes on, people, start to stop, and then you start to see a few people that stick with it. But that's a really interesting from you is like just from an investor standpoint, that young, just putting up the money and you were already plotting out a whole organization.
But in the end, it didn't end well because he got himself into some bud that was like not on caliber with his clientele, and he couldn't get rid of it. And he tried to give it back like to me instead of giving me back like cash. And I was like, at that point, I was like, but I don't sell that, and it's garbage. And so we ended up, getting into like some issue because of it. But that's like the thing was in high school, and then kind of like what you stated, eventually as I got more like hands-on, it was just kind of like selling weeds to, have a personal batch to smoke, without having to pay. So it started back in high school, and then, I have a family that's from like 70s LA. So, years later, when I'm 16, 17, I could see my dad, doing his cannabis thing, or, when I was a kid, I remember seeing those things, But, oh, don't touch those brownies in the refrigerator. Those are adult brownies and stuff,
Yeah, love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. And so, and this is, you say, so this is around the 80s or in the 80s, 90s,
Like in high school, yeah,
90s,
probably mid 90s,
mid
or I'm sorry,
90s.
yeah, probably early 90s.
Yeah.
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 I started.
And then how does it develop? So you kind of by the end of high school, or how does it develop into getting more serious about moving
Sure.
flower?
So eventually I ended up going into business, and I started, as a youngster, I started like an auto detail company. And then through that, I learned how I went to a window tint trade school, and I became like a window tinter. And then I eventually hired like some alarm technicians. But I started just from like literally renting a commercial building with like going to the auto parts store, buying wax and cleaners, you know what I mean? Just going for it, And so I eventually turned it into a business where I had, window tinting, alarms, and auto detailing. And so that in that time, some dope dealers would come through and get various things put on cars because they have, the money to do
Nice
that type
rides.
of
Yep.
stuff. And so, as I kind of always had this entrepreneur mindset. I started at one point. I started an escort company, and then I also started a website that is almost like the Google for finding, like escorts. And at the time, it was called 24hourexotics.com. And when you would go onto my website, you could pick, and these girls would just pay for advertising, like they would pay. I was charging $75, and they could have an ad that links back to their phone number
Wow.
and their email. And then, so I wanted to have, like 100 girls in LA paying me $75, and then 100 girls in Las Vegas paying me $75, in Miami. And so I started doing, that sort of thing. Right. And so I had that business. And through having that, I was at some MMA fights, and I met a cannabis grower, and he knew that I had the window tint shop and the escort, like yellow pages or whatever, Google, right?
Yeah.
And so he was interested, and he was wanted to invest, and so he was like throwing money at me, like, how much can I? So I eventually went into an agreement with him, and partnered up on my website, the 24 Hour Exotics, and through him doing his thing, then he just started throwing me some packs, like, oh, you should check out my stuff. And I didn't know him. A friend of ours just kind of introduced us, so we had a start relationship. And so it didn't start with bud. It started with, he invested into my website company. And then as he would come by the company, he would say he would smell like bud, and he started throwing me a couple of packs. And then it got to the point where and these were all locally grown, and he was a major grower in my neighborhood, and he was just kind of killing it. And I think at that point he also ran across a Canadian source, and then he started importing Canadian bud. And I was just watching and kind of not realizing, and didn't really so much care, because he was just, at that point, I had a credit line, and he would just front me various packs. At that point, maybe I might only get like 100 or 80, or kind of just starting out and doing my thing, right? And so eventually I started to kind of learn this whole, it's coming from Canada and all these things, and Seattle, and started trying to connect the dots. And eventually, as bad as it is for drug dealers to kind of hop the chains of command, he kind of lost his connection through, in Canada, some of the people that he was dealing with, they would do trading. They would trade.
They do the barter system with the blow, or with whatever is easier to smuggle, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So they were trading, and his, company that he was working with, sometimes we refer to these drug dealers as company, they lost their connection as far as getting across the border and whatnot. So I eventually just started thinking, maybe I'll outsource some of this myself. And through my existing business that I started with him, I started taking trips up to Seattle, taking trips to Canada, meeting with other people, and then just kind of got myself hooked in with like the biggest people in British Columbia. And so much so that it's kind of like when you see those movies and they go to other countries, like, and they're meeting with Escobar, So if I could kind of put it into like terms without mentioning their names, it's like probably one of the biggest motorcycle clubs in the world, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
that's who I thought.
yeah.
Yeah, that's who I thought, because that's who runs all that. But like, and then during this time period too, like the BC Bud is like world famous or national, like very famous, right? Like really, really sought after, right?
So like for me, eventually the BC Bud came into like an LA area much better than the local LA area was at that time, right? So Canadian cannabis, it could come in and I might catch a pack of 300, 500, and there could be 20 different strains in there, and they're all indoor and they're all good exotics. I mean, granted, there was some strains where people, they gave it a shot and they maybe blew it up and it just wasn't a hitting number. Like I remember back in the day, like one of the prime one example is Juicy Fruit. And I don't know that it really exists, but I think it yielded a lot and it had the frost and the smell, but it just didn't have that like head to knock you out. But so
good selling
strains
weed.
Like Juicy Fruit and all these strains that were just coming, like almost like when nowadays you go into a dispensary and you have the full menu. Well, the Canadians were just coming hard, and I could go to like my friend's house and show up with like 20 different kinds and be like, oh, there's hash plant, there's sugar shack, there's juicy fruit. So, and essentially that's good. And they ran it like, a corporation with all these various, everything was labeled and, color coded, and how do I want my packaging? And so as I kind of started seeing that in LA, I ran across people that eventually started to kind of like talk negative in regards to BC Bud. They were, oh, that's just BC, and that's as local growers started to get a little bit, better. And probably up north is where, more California growers were doing well at that time. Not so much LA, but anyhow. So I ran across somebody in LA, and they had, some Kush, and I was bringing over, and the Canadian cannabis was labeled in different grades. We had B, and then we have A, and we have AAA. And so I would always want AAA, but they would tell me you can't just take AAA. You have to take
it all.
Yeah. So, oh, it says I got a low battery here. Okay, we're still going.
Yep.
Anyhow, I lost my train of thought where I was going. So
you were at AAA. You had to take it all.
Oh, so somebody in California, sorry about that. Somebody in California had introduced me to like the Kush and was like telling me the prices, and it was like 5,000, 6,000 for 1 pound. And, at this time in LA, maybe a pound was like 4,000, 4,200.
Which is
and
wild.
I was probably
those prices.
Yeah, I was
holy shit.
I mean, when I got out of being incarcerated and I heard the new prices, I was like, wow, so that's incredible.
Yeah.
That was like, actually, eventually at that time, the Canadian price of a pound in Canada was 1,800. But by the time you pay, 600 to cross the border and another couple hundred to get it landed in LA, it's, it's in 2,000 or whatever. So at the time I was probably paying, like $3,000. And eventually I got some clones from some local people and sent the Kush up to Canada so they could mass produce it. And I started getting angry in the beginning when it wasn't arriving. And I was like, they would label something Kush. And then I was like, hey, that's not what I gave you. Are you giving it to someone else? Because I knew there was this huge value in the price, right? So like, and they weren't going to charge me more. I kept even saying, hey, I don't mind paying you more. And they're like, no, as long as you move more, we'll just, shoot this Kush in there for you. Not realizing that I could take something they were going to give to me for 3,000 and turn around and sell it for 5,000. And like literally, who makes $2,000 on a pound times 300?
It's ridiculous.
Unless you're a grower.
Yeah, that's
so I started making like outrageous amounts of money.
Yeah. So So was that 5K a unit? Was that local in LA, or was that when you were moving it out of state?
Yeah. So 5,000 was kind of like before dispensaries even kind of started in LA.
Right,
they kind of
medical,
were just starting to arrive.
Mm-hmm.
And in Los Angeles at one point, a pound of Kush could go for as much as even like 6,000. So me as more of a wholesaler, I was importing them from Canada and then selling them locally in Los Angeles for like 5,000, 52. Wow. And then that market essentially not long after just started to tank. And then somebody came to me and said, hey, I know people in Detroit. And then we kind of came up with the scenario that we can still charge 5,500 in Detroit, even though now in LA, it's, you know, there's the money's just not there anymore. You can't make 2,000 or 1,000 on a pound.
Yeah, and then you start to and then like you, and then like, you know, like people in Cali, they start to become exporters rather than local. You know what I mean? Like you guys start to realize we should just move this out to where it's way, you know, supply and demand, right? Yeah.
Right. My very first what I call out of town customer is I sent 80 pounds in like a pickup truck to Detroit. And they were gonna, you know, I think be on the hook for like 5,500 or maybe more. I forget what it was at that point.
Right around $500,000, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so at the time when they first landed, you know, those guys had never seen Kush before in Detroit, and they actually had problems selling it. And I had them, you know, or they happened to be in a UFC in Vegas, and I explained it to them. This is like Louis Vuitton and Gucci, and this is what the rappers and, you know what I mean? And they're used to like kind of like a stress bud. So in Detroit at that time, there's no like medical, there's no nothing. It's just strictly illegal, you know? Mm-hmm. And so there was operating with a lot of trap houses. And so this particular first crew that I worked with, they were like a gang member that operated in a town where it wasn't just a guy. It was an actual gang, and it was an organization. So I gave that to them, and they had some difficulties, but once I kind of explained that this is like the top of the food chain, like a week, 2 weeks later, they're like, we have 100% of the money. Let's go again. Let's do it. And I just started rocking and rolling with those guys. And then I just started in my head, the monster created, and I started thinking, when I would go to my people in LA, I was more hands-on. Like, let's say if I knew you, I might drive over, hey, what's going on? And drop off at 20 or 30 pounds and chop it up with you. I started, you know, asking people, hey, do you have like family you grew up with, an uncle or cousin that lives in like Detroit? And then I started saying areas like, oh, what about, you know, Chicago is close. And then people started coming to me and saying, well, I know somebody in this state and they would be interested. And as long as I could kind of vet them and make sure they weren't some sort of like law enforcement, right? So yeah. If I knew you and you're like, yeah, it's my cousin or my brother-in-law. And so I could say, what do they do? And so next thing you know, it just, you know, start to exponentially expand. And I went from Detroit to Chicago to Atlanta. And then at some point I got onto an airplanes. And I met
and we're gonna get into that, but I want to go a couple of things really quickly. So like, okay, I was interested about how you got your clientele. So you just did by reference. That's okay. I was in that makes sense.
Well, no, there's interesting ways when you speak of clientele. It's like, so even when I started working with the person that bought into my website, there's we would do things like we would buy customers. So if I could go to you and say, hey, you know, John's your best guy, would you consider selling him to me? And that's how like and I started like, when I first heard that, I was like, that's an interesting kind of deal, you know? And so
that's why I've heard about like buying plugs, like buying like I have homies that, you know, they'd sell their plugs and stuff, but I've never seen selling clients. That's yeah.
So eventually I even bought somebody that we went over their books and they made about $14,000 a month. And so I told him, I'll give you, you know, he actually was moving out of the country. And I said to him, I'll give you $7,000 a month for like the next 8 or 9 months. And then after that, we'll drop it down to 6,000, 5,000, 4,000. And then, so it worked out pretty well. And so, yeah, that's something that we would sometimes do. Or if somebody takes a loss, right, and you give them, and they owe you, you know, $100,000, and they say, oh, somebody ripped me off. Then I would say to them, well, who's your best customer? Oh, this guy, Steve. Well, then I'm going to need Steve and 2 other guys.
Wow.
And so sometimes that's kind of how we would gain customers.
That is brilliant. I have never heard of that. Like, that's dope, because
it's almost hard to extract money from people that can't pay you.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, you know, they live in an apartment, they have a finance car, they owe you $100,000. well, then you say, okay, well, then you're no good to me anymore. Then I'll take these guys, and they're still really, you know what I mean? And you can still try to get some of your
That makes a
debt
ton of
back.
sense. That makes a
Yeah.
ton of sense. No, absolutely. That's a great way to put, like, yeah, no, that I'm just surprised I haven't really heard of that before, to be honest. That's dope. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would also look at a customer as if they're, let's say, a chain of a franchise. We'll say like like the Starbucks, right? So I'm opening every time I'm starting a new business with you, and you're gonna now owe me 100,000. Let's say I've had people on the first run just moved away, and it's something small, it's like 10 pounds, and you're like, really, dude? Like, we could have worked for the next many years and you would have made much more.
Short-term
right?
thinkers, yeah.
But I would consider those person like a Starbucks, and I would say, okay, I opened one on such and such boulevard and it worked, or I opened one on this boulevard and the guy ran off with the money and it didn't work. So I would do it like that. Otherwise, when people, like, you would take a loss or something like that, it just drives you crazy. And it's a way of being able to release that and not wanting to go like, oh, I got to go knock this guy off the face of the earth.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes, and then that's super dope. And then another thing that I wanted to kind of like highlight too, that you just said, when you talk to the Detroit people, right, and you like explain to them, this is super high quality. Like, what's so fascinating to me is like that is like the like, it's like you kind of taught them like you need to leverage the brand, like understand that this is the, like, that's like, you know what I mean, like early form of that, which I think is so dope. Like, and then you see all these different forms of it throughout history, and then you see it all build into like what it is today now, where there's real like legit brands, but like the strains were brands originally, but also like that whole idea of like building hype on the street. That's fascinating to me. I think that's super dope. And so okay, so and then it starts to get into the wild shit where you literally have a fucking air, you're literally running an airline, right? Like
yeah. Eventually, when I was eventually arrested, I was running 3 pilots with 3 separate airplanes, and I always say this, like, one's coming out and one's coming in, and they're just kind of like circling the U.S. One's heading out with 400 pounds, another one's coming back with 3 million, and they were just kind of like, just circling the U.S. like every day of the week. There was just planes in operation.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, and that's just like, okay. And then this is, I think, a good point to kind of ask this question. So, my era, I guess, is, and we're still kind of in this era, is like, the dark web, like sending, like using USPS. Now, I know the volume that you were doing, it doesn't really make a ton of sense to even do that. But like, was that even like were people mailing packs at all back in the day?
They not really people that I knew. At some point, like somebody, when I first was starting, saying, hey, can you like FedEx a sample or something like that? And that just seemed like kind of crazy to me. And then while I was incarcerated, for cannabis, I ran into people that had done stuff like that. And it just seemed like such like not the thing to do, I guess. Right. So I didn't know many people. Every now and then somebody, I always refer to it as like, I call it like cowboy, or, where it's just so, another person, an interesting thing that deviate, this guy would come in from Hawaii and he would always purchase COD. And then he would literally just jump on a commercial airplane and throw it in his check-on baggage. And to me, I was just like, that's gnarly, right? Like to do that type of thing, but, and that's, he would do that with 20 pounds. And I was like, that's kind of ballsy, but
Holy
for
shit.
me, yeah, like I really wasn't into doing things
risking
like
that much. Yeah.
Yeah. Like maybe some of that was instilled in me, in my, some of the people that, I learned from. Like one of the first guys that invested in my website, he was always mad because I was flashy, and he wasn't flashy. And he would always try to tell me, like he would even say, I can't hang out with you, like you drive a Porsche and you do this and you wear those clothes, and, and it's funny that even when I was in Canada and I was trying to outsource stuff, we would want to go to the casino or something. They'd be like, hey, we can't because you're wearing that and you look like a drug dealer, everyone. And it's just funny that, that sort of thing exists. But so after a while, I started to kind of learn, maybe not to do certain things,
Yeah. Well, it's pretty interesting. Like, you're, the guy who invested in your website and kind of the older generation of trappers that are like, they look at today now, like, the people today, like, the kids these days, dude, they're so
Yeah,
flashy.
no, everybody's like using the mail. They don't even care. They're like, they just mail it. And I'm just,
yeah.
I guess what I was getting back to that answer is the Canadians, before they would jump across the border, some of them wouldn't go for weeks upon end because they didn't have what's called a solid, a way to get through. Like, they don't want to just kind of like hope it gets there. They want to know it's getting there, right? So I kind of felt the same way. Like, I don't know that I just want to willy-nilly, that sort of thing. And by having the private airplanes, like, there's nobody at those airports when those dudes land and come in, and it's just so slick. I mean,
it's much more, you're insured. I mean, I definitely,
it is almost a form of insurance.
Yeah. Cause I mean, I've lost packs where, I had friends that would lose packs and they'd be a good amount of money. I mean, it wouldn't be like a crazy, but like it would be,
I guess I shouldn't say it's insurance because the feds eventually filmed all of these things happening, So it's no guarantee, but it does seem a lot safer than, going through the mail. To me, just seems kind of like kamikaze.
Yeah, I think smaller retail, like when you're doing smaller like high volume, smaller, because you were like a wholesaler back in the day,
Exactly.
which is, that's like, it's a lot less, like, but like these people that like set up now is like, they'll send out like 10,000 packs of like an ounce or something, right? Like that,
Right.
that like then they'll have their whole online, dark web, situation going on. Yeah, but that seems like a ton of pain in the ass though. It seems like a ton of time and
Yeah. While I was like incarcerated, I was the Silk Road guy got in trouble, and I recently watched that movie, and so I was incarcerated while that was kind of going on, and it's really trippy to see, and there's still some of that kind of going on, whether it's dark web or people just on their phones shipping stuff everywhere, and it seems there's a lot of that happening,
Yeah, but you were at the beginning of it though, in the sense, because I remember, because I was doing research on you I've been doing research on you the last like couple of weeks, but like this morning I was listening to some stuff, and I heard you mention in another interview you were doing like PGP encryption.
Yeah.
Which is like, that's OG beginning, like that's like, that's how like the dark web like communicate with each other, right? Like that's
how interesting. So for those people that don't know, PGP is what I was using at the time was a BlackBerry, and it was instant messaging, kind of like what we do with text messaging, but it was email, and it was, split seconds, and we could go from country to country. And so when you would purchase this BlackBerry, inside the box, oftentimes, unless it was like just going to be shipped to you and they didn't mind, that you would see like parts of the inner phone taped to the box, like the microphone was taken out, like the camera was taken out, like literally somebody went in there and snipped things or whatever, like, or disabled.
Nothing they can get spied, they can't spy on you with, right?
Right, yeah. And then so there's it's called PGP encryption, and these people that operated these storefronts that would sell these phones are very indiscreet. It's kind of like a black market sort of thing, and they operate like servers that are based out of the areas that we do business in. So it would make it harder for law enforcement to get into those servers, and then those servers would scrub, and meaning scrub like deleting everything from the network. There might be, 1,000 people on this one server, and it's all mainly dope dealers. So it doesn't backtrack to any sort of address, but there was a lot of things that we do, even through, coding in, numbers. So I would communicate oftentimes in numbers, and they would decipher that, even though we're on PGP encryption. And when it goes to the server, it also scrambles itself. So even if somebody were to hack in there, they would just be looking at all of this random stuff that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
But who knows? I mean, maybe the government invented PGP, so it's
I
really
think
like,
they did. I think they did because that's kind of what
yeah.
it comes from in my, like, if I'm correct. So originally, like the Tor network, which is the whole foundation of the dark web, which is like it's just an onion browser where like it's just like you're saying. I don't know if this is what PGP is. I wish my friend was here. He would know. But it bounces, like, it bounces your IP all over, the world. And it was developed by the Navy, I think, in like the 80s. And then they released it to the public, or got leaked or something. And then that's why we have the dark web. And I don't know if I think that might be, a lot of crazy technologies were developed originally by, some, the military,
The,
but
as I was sitting like serving my sentence, I sometimes thought like, wow, if I maybe had one of those Blackberries for every person I did business with, the chances would be a lot less likely. I mean, once those people get their hooks in you, it's almost inevitable. But those phones, I mean, as soon as the day I was arrested, they came like jamming into the house, and they were like yelling to themselves, "Where's the BlackBerry?" You know what I mean? So they had already known from other people along the way that had got cracked. And so I myself fought my case, and my lawyer would always tell me, no, they can't get into your BlackBerry. They've been trying and they can't get into it. One of the things that also went with the Blackberries is if you try to put in the password so many times,
it
it
would
would
delete it
just
all. Yeah.
delete everything. And then if you and I do business together and I happen to know that you just got arrested, I can take your BlackBerry and remotely wipe it.
Oh, wow.
So even if you were to cooperate and you're just like here, then most of the time it would like scrub itself. I don't know if it's still how that would entirely work. I don't know, because I know if I would save things, it'd be on there. I never had mine remotely wiped, but apparently that was something that could also a feature that could be done. And I remember asking it, "Oh, dude got busted. We need to wipe his phone." You know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy was, so like with Ross Albright, the guy who started the Silk Road, right? They had been, the feds were like following him for a while, but what they had to do is they had to literally have somebody destroy, like he was in a public library. And I don't know if you saw this in the movie, but like they had to have him like get distracted because the laptop had to be open, or else they wouldn't be able to get into it at all. And so they had to literally find like the right time to distract him enough where they could grab the computer while it was open.
Still
And
open, yeah.
so it shows you like how strong that encryption can be.
Yeah,
I think that was
totally.
PGP, I think, or something like that. Yeah. Or yeah. So I mean, yeah, that's nutty.
And then that kind of even just makes me think, a lot of people, probably your viewers, don't know that, part of my incarceration, I got to see other inmates, and there's a lot of people there that are not only arrested for various other types, but just for phone calls. So people don't know, and this is things they should know,
Yeah.
is if you and I go and meet at Starbucks and you say, "Oh, I'm setting up a grow, I'm going to do 100 lights and pull fucking 200 pounds every couple months," and I'm like, "Cool, have fun," and then you get busted, and then you're like, "Oh, well, I told Sid all about it, but he didn't do anything." They could literally come and arrest me because we'd had a conversation in conspiracy. So
That's
conspiracy
so
laws,
fucked up.
like,
Oh my
yeah,
God.
I don't think exist in other countries. I think America is the only country where if you and I, even if we didn't follow through, but we're talking about things on the phone, like, "Hey, I want to, start a grow. I want to do an illegal. I'm sending this there," and instantly, you don't
That's
even have to have
fucked up. Yeah.
because when I this was a delusion of mine that prior to my arrest is I always thought, oh, you gotta have to be caught with it, right? In the government system, the way the laws are written, you don't have to be caught with it. They can kick in your door and you can have zero drugs at your house, and it's because of your phone conversations and all those things. And I mean, it's just crazy that they don't have these types of laws in other countries.
Yeah, and it definitely, I mean, that's just like the whole prison. I mean, we have the most, by far the biggest population in prison, and it's the private prisons and stuff. And I mean, it's disgusting what happened. Yeah,
I guess what I was getting at is there was one guy that while I was incarcerated, and his was like a different type of drug, and he was literally on like 2 phone calls. And because he thought, well, I'm on 2 phone calls, I didn't do, you know what I mean? They don't have much. I'm going to go to trial. And when you go to trial in the federal system, they give you oftentimes 2 or 3 times your offered plea agreement. You know,
To
they'll
scare
offer
you into
and so because you're spending their time and their money, they'll give you substantial time. So, you know, he thought he had a insignificant charge. Like, oh, I'm on a couple phone calls. Well, sure enough, a couple phone calls are enough to get him. I think he got 20 years, you know, just because
oh my God.
he decided to go to court or, you know, trial.
to go fight because he didn't want to, you know,
So
tell
all these people,
yeah.
when they like, even recently, someone hit me up. They're like, "Hey, let me get your old connections," and and I was like, oh, "Okay," and I just brushed it off, you know. And then he kept doing it on my phone, and I was like, "What's wrong with you, dude? Are you retarded? Like, get off my phone with that. Like, I don't do that, you know. Like,
Yeah.
people don't realize the severity of like the dumb shit they do, you know." So
Yeah. And did that come with the RICO, like with the mob? Is that what the whole conspiracy, like this conspiracy, that whole, like, because
I think conspiracy came when the Reagans. I think the Reagan era, the war on drugs. I'm pretty sure is when conspiracy came into play. And conspiracy just essentially is just having conversations or doing things, and yeah. So in my mind, I didn't know that law existed, and people may not know that today that, you know, are doing that. I just thought, oh, I'm not going to raid my house and find me with 100 pounds. I'll be okay. And I didn't really know much about the difference between federal and state.
yeah,
You know,
and the
so
feds, they have like what, like a 98% conviction rate, which is just
yeah. So it's impossible to try to go to trial.
yeah, it's like millions of dollars. It's like one out of every, like,
Even if you feel like, oh, you know, I didn't do it. You know, I have a friend of mine I spent time with while I was incarcerated. He went to trial. And a prime example is he probably would have got a 10-year sentence, but because he went to trial, he got 30.
yeah.
And I'm just thinking like, I'm totally agree with, you know, people should have to do their time, but the lengthy time is where I think it gets excessive, right? And
Yeah,
so
for nonviolent drug, you know, like
for someone to do like maybe even potentially like just a first offender, just because the scale they were on and they went to trial, to get a 30-year sentence is, for some people, that's life. Because, you know, if you're already, you know, 35, 40, I mean, who knows what you'll live to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
yeah.
that's crazy.
And it's all to scare them into either, you know, working.
There was people I was incarcerated with, and I was like, oh, we always discuss how much time do you get. One dude had got 27 years for having fucking this much crack in his palm. And crack was like a huge disparity on the sentencing scale. I mean, you could have a kilo and get less time as a guy with a handful of crack, and it was like fucking just crazy.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, sorry to deviate off.
No, that's all. No, it's fascinating to me, dude. And that's a really good point that you bring up. And it's a point that people need to understand. One, be careful out there and be listening. But two, like, it's a pretty fucked up system, in my opinion. I mean, that's there's no reason people should be in jail.
Oftentimes I would sit there and just think, you know, like, man, you know, like what you do differently or how you do, you know what I mean? And so
yeah, and a lot of wasted potential in these, and it's just because a small group of people, you know, they make, you know, they make $50,000-$60,000 off these inmates, right, for the private prisons. And yeah, it's all turned into a pretty fucked up system, pretty disgusting system. That's something that, like, I talk about a lot on my channel is the war on drugs. Now it's absolute failure. Waste of time, money.
I mean, there was a dude who I knew of through my cannabis while I would walk around and discuss with other inmates. Some of them I had friendships with other cannabis inmates, and one dude we talked about that had got life, and it's just like, to get life for cannabis just seems like it's just not right, dude. You know, like, okay, do your time, dude, but to give somebody life for the plant, you know, like, come on, dude.
Yeah. Now there's millionaires off of it, right? There's people that are legit millionaires, while there's people still sitting in prison for it.
Yeah.
Right. Which is just, it's
speaking of that, I don't know if you guys have caught much wind. You know, there's even a lot of, you know, celebrities involved. Like recently through my artwork, I've been doing some stuff for it's called Caviar Gold, and they've done an agreement with Ice Cube. So in collaboration with Ice Cube, and so it's crazy to see that at once people that myself are like a pirate of, you know, bootlegging, you know, the mob era of cannabis, to people that are like, you know, the tobacco industry almost.
The suits, the suits that are.
Yeah. So It's interesting. I always think I was just a modern day bootlegger.
Yeah.
Another version of bootlegging.
100%. And that's and that's kind of why, like, exactly, you were exactly right. And that's kind of why I think we're in a unique position to, like, that's why I, like, really, one, I want to tell these stories like yours, because I want people to not ever forget what people like yourself went through, and then, like, that time period, because we're going to get to the point where, like, a couple generations from now,
Yeah,
people,
that they won't even know what that is. Like when you and I think of like a Lucky Luciano or an Al Capone that was running alcohol, we can comprehend through the movies, but do we really know? Type of
the
thing.
actual stories, what they actually, 100%. And we're in this digital age now where we got, all this, technology. We can.
I try to do a lot of forward thinking, but I didn't think about that aspect, how generations to come, as cannabis continues to, be on the forefront of legal and whatnot and all of the mainstream, and kids, years from now won't even realize like, oh, people did this in duffel bags and they put it in cars, illegal, they're just like, that's going to be the weirdest thing to them,
100%. And there's not even a ton of media out there really trying, because, like, I always talk about preservation of this time period. That's kind of like what I think is, important. Not, and it's people glorify it, like it's of course it's really interesting. It's kind of sexy. Like it's all, it's really amazing stories. But, I think, yeah, like you're right. I mean, yeah, it's like, 3 generations from now, it's gonna be weird for people, like for those kids to think about like this, where
they're just gonna know like the things that gets embedded, like it's candy, like the Captain Crunch and the name brands, and they won't really know that people were like my packaging was a vacuum sealer with a Sharpie and color-coded tape. You know what I mean? With a number on it, like this number belongs to Sin.
I love that, dude. That's So what was your kind of, so that was your unique packaging? Because I've talked to a lot of different people, and like some people, to build that kind of street cred, they'll use like unique packaging. But I was always like, isn't that a little bit sketchy, like identifiable? I know you were doing wholesale, so it was a little bit different.
So I didn't necessarily do that so much on my end. It was more to identify like tracking from things going from one country to another country. So the Canadians, they would vacuum seal hundreds of pounds, and oftentimes maybe on the ride that would cross the border, there might be like 1,700 pounds, but maybe I was only going to get 500. And the reason why it was such a large number is because it was a motorcycle club and it wasn't an individual. So all of the club members would throw on a ride, and sometimes they would broker to other people like, hey, you could throw on. And you yourself might go, oh, I got a dude and I'm going to throw on, my 400 or my 300. So essentially, they would unpackage when a ride would come across the border into like areas of Seattle or Washington. For instance, this one's kind of a known thing, so it's okay to talk about it. There was once a cattle trailer that was used, and you can't use a gamma ray to identify or like to do a scan of what's in the truck trailer crossing the border from Canada into America. And so they would use a cattle trailer with a false bottom, and then the false bottom would be filled with, like 1,700 pounds. And then they would throw manure and, all of this cows or whatever, and just take cattle like they're taking them from one farm to another farm, right? And so when those would arrive in the States, let's say I would have a number on my 500 pounds, and it was like a 3-digit number, like 737. So everything labeled 737, they know that belongs to Sin. And then it also had a color-coded like electrical tape. Wow. So oftentimes, like it could be a various color, like mine's red, right? Or maybe I'll catch a load for someone else too, and I'll have, their yellow tape and then their 3 digits. So I have red and yellow, and then we kind of know. And it was funny that through what I was doing, I would oftentimes meet with the Canadians at like UFC venues in like, penthouses with, butler services. And it would be myself with like 5 or 6 other members. And they would actually come to me and ask me, how do you want them packaged? What do you want us to do better? Because I remember I got really pissed, and they did as well, because somebody had packed a load, and I guess they thought for whatever reason they took one head of lettuce. It was like the size of my palm, and it was like they were vacuum sealing these. Are like this thick, like a square album cover would be, like a piece of vinyl, but this thick and packaged in two. And there was a time where every fucking pound that I got on a load had a piece of lettuce on there, and underneath the lettuce was just saturated like mold and soggy, wet, because it was just like flat, you know, it wasn't disputed or, you know, distributed. And so I was like, you guys ruined a large portion of the bud, right? And so that was like a board meeting, you know, and then they had the packers there, like, okay, we got fucking this guy and he's a packer, and how, and I would tell them, you know, and they had like, I guess they were even doing like CO2 inside the packaging, so we wouldn't like squish it and keep it air. And so there's all these things to try to make it to where it's still fresh and good through transport. Speaking of that, it's even, I remember one time I went to a shop up in Canada and pick out all of the bud I was gonna get, and I picked out a few hundred. And I remember within that few hundred, I was back in LA after my trip, and I had got some, and it was really killer, like purple, but it was just littered with seeds. And I was like, wow, how did I miss this? But there wasn't a substantial amount within the load, but I was just like, wow, this is crazy. I went up there, hand-picked a bunch of bud, waited for the whole week for the packing, the transport arriving, and now I got a bunch of seeds, you know?
No, yeah, that's wild. So and you know, when you were saying like, you know, the people up in Canada, like they run a lot more corporate, like, I mean, they really do, like.
And I try to tell people, like my friends, Americans, oftentimes people operate, even when I was at my sentencing, they sentenced me with what's called the leadership role, and I got enhancements, right? And so I was trying to fight that, and my lawyer was trying to say, well, he's not the leader because everyone works for themselves. They don't get a paycheck. He's not telling them it's their deal. But in Canada, it operated different because it's a motorcycle club. Everybody brings their product to the clubhouse, and everyone brings it, and they work in unity, as opposed to, I'm a dope dealer and I work out of my apartment. They work out of like a commercial building, and they work together, and there's packagers and crews, and not many people in today's, like in America, like to form those alliances because everyone's, I guess, greedy or selfish, or they're gonna get screwed or whatever. I guess now that cannabis is more legal, that you can see some of that, you know, like more of a corporate company. But, you know, back in my day, it was like, in Americans, they were just kind of going for it, where the Canadians were more structured.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that probably comes out of the fact that there was originally already an organization
Built in,
built in.
So
And
it's the same way when I would find a new customer, and it wasn't just one person, but he had ties to like his gang, you know, community or something.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, that's insane, dude. That's and yeah, that's just crazy to me. And there's, I mean, yeah, it just blows my mind because there's a lot of things you've said to me that I've never thought about, and I mean, I kind of study this stuff, like, you know, which is that's dope. Did you even really spin some game here? Yeah. So I guess I know you've talked a lot about the whole situation with the cocaine and stuff a lot on other interviews. I'm trying, I don't want to dwell too long on this, but I mean, you kind of became on accident, an Escobar, a Chapo, right?
I did, yeah. And so for the people that are watching for the first time and don't know, what essentially happened is the Canadians, they don't use American dollar, so they would give me, British cannabis, Canadian cannabis, and then I would owe them 3 million, 5 million. At one point, I even owed them as much as 9 million was my bill. And oftentimes they would say, hey, Sin, there's a money drop. Here's the dude's number. I don't even know him. And I would sometimes do BlackBerry or just a cold call, like, hey, what's up? And it would be like a person that had like Hispanic that didn't speak almost very good English, like could almost, so much so, not even tell me how to like get to the point to meet him. Like I want to meet in Victorville at the grocery store on 3rd Street. Like it was difficult. And I was always wondering, like, why is that? And I just thought it was just part of the network. Right. And so I kind of knew or heard little rumors about how the Canadians, instead of bringing the currency that once their cannabis was here, bringing American dollar across the border, they decided to start bringing, you know, people bring blow. And I remember going to Las Vegas to meet with one of the Canadians, and he said to me like, hey, you know, it's over with. I can't really send anything for right now. And I was thinking like, he kept saying like he wanted to retire and we're all get out of the, you know, the game soon. And myself, I had just started to expand and wasn't really, you know, ready to. So I thought in my head, is that what he's talking about? But then he said, we have a lot of money tied up in the States. We have like 4 million, you know, at one house in Orange County. And then we have the 3 or 5 million you owe us. And so we want to alleviate and get some of that cash like back into our country before we send you more. And then he was like saying that the cash they had sitting at a house was eventually going to be what we refer to as a wire and invested into blow, and then the blow brought back up to Canada. And so he was like, well, we can't get any, it's really dry, no one has any, our source is out, and you know, maybe you might know somebody. And you know, I really kind of like didn't, other than if I went to a social party and some friends had some personal, like never experienced any of that before. So I got back to LA and I thought, you know, there's a couple homies and people that are, you know, around that sort of thing, and you know, their families are, and you know, like a Chapo type of background families and stuff, and they took cannabis from me. And so I hit them up. And so my first transaction, they were like, well, how much do you need? And I was like, I don't know, like $4 million. And the dude like was like, no. I'm like thinking that's like a setup. Like who does that for the very first transaction? So he was like, we could do something. And so I ended up just doing like, it took all day where we did one in like an hour, and I waited at a hotel and I got these Canadians like 5 kilos. And then the Mexico type people, right? They were like, okay, now tomorrow is another day and we're willing to, you know, start to open up the floodgates a little more. So next thing you know, I alleviated and got rid of all of the cash that they wanted to turn into blow. And then I thought, you know, okay, cool. You guys probably have your plug back on track. And, you know, I just did you the one-time favor. And then they were like, oh no, like that worked out really well. Can we keep it going? And so I was like, I didn't want the cannabis to stop, you know, so I was somewhat kind of like, you know, led into it, you know, without really like wanting to be into it. And so when I first did it, I remember not even making much money. I just kind of wanted to get the cannabis flowing again, right? Mm-hmm. And so then when they asked me to do it again, I started kind of doing it. The next thing you know, it was like other Canadians were hearing that this guy in LA can now alleviate money that people have. So when I was saying that there would be a trailer with 1,700 pounds, okay, I dealt with maybe, you know, a couple guys that were on that trailer. Well, what about those 10 other guys? They're starting to hear that all of their bud can be, you know. So anyways, they start to tell me like, hey, you know, they basically like want me to work for the largest like Scarface of Canada, where this guy's like, yeah, I want 150 kilos a week.
Wow.
That, and I'm just like, and then my other guys are like, yeah, I want, you know, 80, and another guy wants 40. So next thing you know, I have like 3 or 4 Canadians that they just want. And I was like, at some point I even hit them up. I was like, what are you guys doing? It's like 1980 up there. Like where, like I just fell into being this gigantic blow dealer. I didn't like
which is so wild.
You know what I mean? It was like, and some people refer to it like, you're too young, but if anybody knows the cartoon Mr. Magoo, and Mr. Magoo, he's blind, but he always seems to like miss everything or fall right into the right place of like, you know, whatever, right? And so next thing you know, I'm selling, you know, hundreds and hundreds of kilos a month to various Canadians.
Could you have stopped that's nuts. Could you have stopped? Like, could you have told them no, in your opinion, if or not?
Well, there was times where I was like, hey, things are kind of got hot and this guy got in trouble and let's take a break. But they would still kind of like pressure that was, I think, in the end, more a necessity for them as it was for the cannabis. The cannabis was kind of just like an ends to get that real thing, and then they were actually not make much money off the cannabis because, like I mentioned earlier in the program, a pound was like 1,800,
Up
and
there,
by the
yeah.
time it crossed, but profit's profit. So they might make $500-600 on a pound, and then on a kilo, I might sell it to them, let's say for 25. They were selling it for close to 40.
Yeah, and the volume of the cannabis compared to the coke and the amount of profits. So like the smuggling was easier to smuggle coke and then to sell it, and you get more profit rather than because the volume of cannabis is just it's fluffy, it's not compact.
Sure.
Well, and so that must have been because that was kind of the first. Had they been doing that? Had that been a thing? Because
I had heard a little bit about it, but I never really caught much wind of it until they, I was in a hotel room and they broke it down to me, and I thought I was doing a favor, and then I started realizing, oh, this is what they were doing. I even started doing it so much so to where we would refer to as a wire transfer, where somebody had maybe money in Canada and then somebody had money in America, but they wanted money in each place, and they would sell each other money for a percentage. I'll sell you $1 million for 3%. So they're getting, 20,000 on top of their million.
Wow.
So yeah. Interesting exchange.
100%. Because the guy that I did the one I mentioned really at the very beginning of this, the guy that did the first episode of the Trap Tree series on, he's in the Northeast. He's a Canadian guy, but he was like the biggest cannabis dealer in New York history or whatever. But and this is later. This is a little bit later. This is in the, he's still in jail right now, I think. This is in the 20 late.
Let him out.
Yeah, let him out. I mean, yeah, it's for sure. Let everyone out for it's a fucking plant. I mean, right. But they were doing this, he was doing the same thing. And so you're kind of, just, I mean, they might have probably were doing it before, but kind of the genesis of that, or the beginning, at least to what we know. That's, yeah. I mean,
it's pretty genius on their part. They're making money on both ends.
Money on top of money. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So, it's just a way to capitalize. And I always refer to, eventually trying to get, involved in a movie script for, what it was that I was doing. And it just would be the drug trade, we're trading, and it's kind of different than the movie Blow. People are just moving product. Here we were trading commodities, which is a little bit kind of different than
a little bit more complex,
more drug cases that you hear about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because, the craziest part, I remember when, when people talk about the cocaine cowboy era with Pablo Escobar and stuff, they'd always talk about, I always remember they would always, in different documentaries and stuff, they'd be getting the blow in was easy, but the amount of money in terms of size and volume that generated from the blow was the comparisons where they showed it would just be a stack
For
of
sure.
Cash. It'd be way harder to get the money out than get the drugs in, or at least the cocaine, because it's all compacted. Yeah.
And then sometimes, Canadian dollar, it might even be let's just say $100 American, you trade it in and you're only getting, $70 or whatever. I remember being in Canada and I had American money and I went to the casino and they hardly gave me any of my money back. And I was like, oh, now I'm starting to kind of get what these guys are doing, and it started making a little bit more sense,
Yeah, absolutely.
For them to just trade commodities and make more.
Yeah.
As opposed to just bringing US dollar. And sometimes even the currency exchange rate manipulated the price of the yayo, or maybe even the cannabis.
Yeah, you get a better deal on it if you, that's insane.
How
So
funny that people are like thinking of currency exchange rates for drugs.
no, it could
Market
tell with you, dude.
exchange rates.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are like mad scientists with it, bro. I mean, you guys you
Yeah.
guys are running it like you guys are running it like a corporation. You know, they're doing, every aspect of the operation. They're trying to optimize and see how they can make money, which is, I mean, it shows. I mean, it's very
Like
intelligent.
they had called when they named my investigation. They called it they used my first name, and then they called it my syndicate.
Yeah, yeah,
And then they refer to it as intertransnational organized crime.
wow.
Sounds fancy, right?
Sounds
Yeah.
sounds like they're trying to hype it up. I mean, I
Yeah.
mean, it is. I mean, it's pretty insane. In total, how much do you think? Roughly, how much did you think you smuggled or sold,
Um,
collectively? If you, because I saw a number around 100 million.
yeah, it's I don't know like how I could even describe a number, like
Yeah.
cannabis wise, it was as far as the crew, the organization, a few thousand, probably 4 or 5 thousand a month, but myself, maybe I was only on the, dumping a few thousand of that myself, right?
Yeah.
But they had, other guys that were like me. But once, the Canadians, in the beginning, I didn't want them to know that I was sending it all over America, because I thought for them, they thought that could potentially be a risk. And
Risk. Yeah.
they're always minimalist with risking, right? And
Mm.
so I never really wanted them to know that I was incurring that huge risk and potentially could take a loss and maybe not afford to pay them or that sort of thing. Eventually, when they wanted money faster, like, hey, today, tomorrow, and I just started saying, hey, money's in Atlanta, money's in New York. Like, you're not getting your money for another. So I just started being, more
You just had to
honest
tell
with
them what was up. Yeah.
yeah, and this is just through text messaging. We never
Mm.
spoke on the phone, so I can be a little more firm and a little more, our boss, or a little more articulate on what needs to happen. So eventually, I broke it down and was like, "Hey, I'm sending these everywhere," and they were like, "Oh, badass! Can we throw on with you?" And like, we'd like to start getting it to Chicago, and we'd like to start getting it and so then I started brokering, their stuff for a percentage. Like, for instance, if my pilot would charge me $100 per pound for transportation, then I would charge the Canadians like $200 per pound. So through my navigating, my transportation and wherever their pack is going, I could still make a little bit off of theirs as well too.
Wow. Yeah, and that's insane. I'm curious in this question. I like to ask certain people this, and you're definitely one of them. I'm curious what you think about this. Like, do you think that drug dealing is a drug in itself?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It definitely became an addiction for myself when I knew there was some close calls with like law enforcement. I probably should have already gave my business over to someone else, like how I purchased some customer from someone else. Um, Essentially, that doesn't leave me out of being legally prosecuted or whatever, right? But it's still probably something that I probably should have done, and I didn't do, because it became some like bigger than me and somewhat of an addiction.
Yeah.
So even while I was incarcerated, I was you can get 1 year taken off your sentence for participating in a drug rehabilitation program. It's referred to as RDAP. And so I did that program, and I was a mentor in that program, where all the inmates had to come to me to do certain things. And we would do almost like a seminar every morning with like 100 inmates. And so during like the morning seminars, I had to come up with topics as a mentor. And one of the topics was addiction that was not related to, drugs and alcohol or like personalities, but like a form of like my addiction that I spoke about that day was money. And that was like, and I think that that's very prominent with our culture today. And everyone, they want to like, they act like all the rappers when they're in a video, none of them own any of that. You know what I mean? It's all just a facade. And so that's like one of the addictions that led to my being incarcerated was the addiction to selling drugs, and then the addiction to the money involved in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I think people like, cause I saw that like with myself, like I always tell like my little homies that, you know, they're just, I'm like, you got to realize this is a drug and you need to taper off of it. Just like, you
For
know,
sure.
yeah. And it's like, everyone always says like, oh, I'm about to get in and then get out, and less than 1% ever do. If, you know, who, I don't know the numbers on that, but you know, it really is a drug. Like it's the money, it's the whole, you know. So, you know, shout out to my homie CJ Humboldt. He said this to me when I asked him this question, and he goes, you know, do you think gambling is addictive? And I go, yeah. And then he goes, well, imagine if you're gambling with your freedom every single day, right? So like that's another aspect of the addiction where it's
That's
like
a good
that
way to
risk.
look at it.
Yeah. But I think
Yeah.
the money is the initial like one aspect. But I think there's more. It's like, I think drug, like the addiction of drug dealing. It's like,
Yeah, you know,
yeah.
not to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I sorry if I do.
No.
I see like today's generation, how people like sensationalize it and think it's so cool. And like drug dealing in itself, like gray market, illegal, like those people also, they're like, there's a mental thing in their head where they think it's cool and they're doing it. And it's like, you know, and they don't realize, you know, like
The consequences.
it's probably a little bit of maybe mental health. There's a lot of mental health that exists in, you know, in the world. And, you know, not everybody, you know, gets instilled that from where they're brought up. And, you know, look, I was probably, you know, felt to that as well, right? You know, I can't throw stones, you know, right at a glass house, but you know, in retrospect, I'm sure there are a lot of people that, you know, sensationalize it and just do it because they think it's fucking cool, like the movies and whatnot, you know?
Absolutely. And then they're stuck in it, then they have to keep going, and then eventually,
It's kind of like when kids are in high school and they want to be popular. Certain kids are using like cannabis or dope dealing as a form of being popular.
I mean, that's what happened with me in a certain sense. Well, I wanted money. I was like, I was a natural entrepreneur, kind of like yourself, like I was attracted to it, but like, that's another whole aspect of the addiction of like prominence and people, growing up with like, selling and stuff, like, I really, and then once I stopped, I really fell off a cliff with my confidence, because I realized that growing up, I built a lot of my confidence off of that facade, and that, you know what I mean? And so, it's stupid saying that, but it's true. I mean,
No, it's society today.
yeah, 100%. Yeah. And like, I grew up, like, the school I went to, I went to school that was like, it was kind of hood, and like, we like praised like, Gucci Mane, Waka Flocka, like the trap era had just come into the fray, and we're, and so it didn't really hit that point where like, I mean, trap music has become like everything that we listen to. And so, the dope man was kind of, praised.
It's like its own genre at this point.
It really is. I mean, yeah, 100%. And yeah, and it's all based off of the trap, and yeah, absolutely. And I always want to ask people. I always want to ask people.
I kind of would like to, at some point, I don't know like how to get there, but would almost like to, how as a painter, that I'm a painter now, people do like they say, oh, how are you? Are you an abstract, contemporary? Are you pop art? Are you street graffiti? I would almost like to just have the genre of trap art. Like, I don't know that it even exists. There's a trap museum, and
I was gonna say the
right?
trap museum. Yeah.
It would almost be, kind of cool, or just to be like, yeah, I'm a trap art, and
That'd be
people would
so
be like,
dope.
what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you kind of do.
Maybe
like
I'm ahead of my time with thinking that.
I think you should do. I mean, definitely, dude. I think that would be, and that's another aspect of the preservation of it through your, your artistic ability. So when did you get into the art though? Like, I want to talk about this.
Sure. Art, I kind of started in like middle school, in like 6th and 7th grade. I got into these 2 books that were out, like Spray Can Art and Subway Art. And they were like full color books of like what's known as like, big graffiti pieces that really look more like art rather than just someone, taking a one color can. And so I kind of really like, I just loved the graffiti, the colors and the characters. And it went with, I was a DJ at the time too. I had turntables as a kid. I was probably like 14 and already like mixing and stuff. And so I really got into like looking at graffiti. So while I was in class early on, 14 years old, 15, like I started just doing graffiti. And then I did a little bit on the street, not so much.
Were you a tagger or?
A little bit, yeah. I was more of like a vandal.
What did you write back? I know I can ask you this.
Back then I would write clever. Was something I thought was kind of cool, and this is just young, defiant, experimenting with tagging and art and stuff. And so just kind of through doodling. And then while I was in early high school, I lived at my mom's house, and my mom started taking like some oil painting classes. And then she would come back to the house and, she got a canvas for myself and some brushes. And then I remember I went to one of her classes. And so I just kind of like hobby crafting, in high school at home. And I remember like one of the first nights getting a canvas and paint and like literally like staying up all night, it was like before the internet, it's like something to do. And so I just kind of got into, and I saw it today. I don't know the word for it, but there's like a state of mind like that. It's kind of like Taoism or a flow where like nothing else exists and you're just in that
Nirvana
moment. It's similar, I would think. And so I enjoyed it. And as I was painting at that age, like let's say my friends' parents would come over because everybody interacts with Little League and school. And so parents come over and friends, people would see my paintings and say, oh, that's cool. And, want it for their own house. And so it didn't equate in my head, that I could make money. And most of the time I would just be like, I wouldn't want to charge them as a business. I would think, oh, I bought the canvas for, $70 and $50 in paint, how about $200, and they would, and so I was selling art anyhow. So then I went on and I just kind of lost track and, went on to do my cannabis thing. And then I got incarcerated in the feds. And while I was incarcerated, I went to an institution in San Pedro, California called Terminal Island. And at that place, your case managers and the people that you have to interact with, the staff, they want you to do, what do they refer? They call it programming. And they want you to go take classes, right? Like, oh, you have to take learn how to make a script class, or, even if it's just bullshit classes, they want you to have something in your file that says you're programming while you're incarcerated. So I remember coming across like an oil painting class at the institution, and in order to program, sorry, the thing went low for a second. In order to program, my battery might be low. So at some point, I don't know if you can send me, can I use the Zoom link again on my laptop?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah.
So if that happens anyway, so I'm using an iPad. While that happened, I actually lost my train. I ever do that every time I lose the
Terminal Island.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. So while I was at Terminal Island at the painting, I signed up for the paint class. And there was about 25 inmates, and we all had to paint like an apple and an orange. And it turns out there was like, I didn't know, this guy was lying at first. And he said he wasn't like he was not a sex offender, because in the prison, I can't associate with like a sex offender. Yeah. And even if you're the teacher of a class, like I can't take your class because you're a sex offender type thing, right? So this guy was saying he was cool. So I took an oil painting class, and then everyone's like, oh yeah, you can put your name in, and you can get a locker, and you can order art supplies. You can order acrylic paint, you can order canvas and brushes. And so after I take the class, I was like, pretty cool. And so I put my name in, and I got myself a locker, and a locker is literally like as high as like your waist, with like a little locker almost at like a gym, And so I would just keep all my paints in there, and I was allowed to have stuff that was like non-toxic, like I can't have like lacquers and paint thinners, but I could still essentially order everything to paint. So while I was there, I just decided to kind of like not stop. There's a lot of artists that would maybe get a locker and they would find it struggling or challenging as a beginner, because you have to hone your skill, right? And it just takes a while. So I just figured, I have this time, I have a hobby locker. I ended up befriending like 4 or 5 other people that had lockers around mine. So we all kind of had like a camaraderie amongst ourselves. Like, this guy, he did leather and he's a painter, and this guy draws, and we all kind of hang out and crack jokes on each other. And so I literally painted in a federal institution for 6 years.
Wow.
And 7 days a week, other than there was a time where I went to solitary confinement for, getting into trouble. I painted every single day. So I had a workout regimen, and then I would go to the hobby shop whenever they would open, it's called the South Yard. So whenever the South Yard was open, every day I would be in the hobby shop in there painting. So prior to me leaving, like 2 or 3 years to me leaving, I kept saying, I'm gonna become an artist on the street. And I started trying to learn, like what these artists are doing and what pop culture and a series and acrylics and mediums. And then I just started saying, I'm gonna start sending paintings home to my dad and start saving them as a form of a bank account, as having some sort of value. So even some people would kind of get upset because, let's say you're an inmate and you'd say, hey, Sin, can you do a portrait of, my wife and my 2 kids? And, I could totally do a portrait of your face, but, or I was started doing Monopoly art, and an inmate would come up to me. So I would tell these guys no. And let's say I'm doing a Monopoly art, and we still buy and sell things in prison. We have our currency in there. We use actually as stamps. So we use stamps as a form of money or commissary. So people, sometimes other artists would sell their art. And after a while, I would be like, no, it's not for sale. No. And so people would get mad, like, oh man, that dude's an asshole. He doesn't ever fucking sell any of his art, and he thinks he's this. And so I just started saving paintings. And when I got released, I had about 150 paintings, put away. And I was in a halfway house, not even all the way home yet, still partially incarcerated through the government. And an art gallery contacted my social media, and I just started corresponding with them. And through that gallery, he just started like selling just a bunch of artwork. And that's just, one little storefront. And it just was amazing to see, like, if potentially I could get, my story, seen on a grander scale, like let's say, a Netflix or something, then my art would potentially be more valuable and create more, clientele or more
the
sales.
Story behind it is so critical. And that, because I would, keep going.
It's kind of like, let's say right now, and maybe you're not into art, or you are, but like, let's say all of a sudden CNN tells you today, they put up 4 pictures. El Chapo did these 4 paintings in prison. Pretty sure like some dudes are going to say, dude, I need that.
That's brilliant,
you know what I mean?
Dude. Yeah.
And they're going to be valuable. So it's kind of like, that's the sense. And I'm trying to create value and hoping that people that purchase my artwork now and respect and appreciate. And oftentimes people want to purchase my artwork just because of the cannabis background and the dope dealing background. And so, and when they use the word legend and stuff like that. And so it just kind of, that's kind of like what I didn't really think to that before I got out. I didn't really think about the backstory. It crossed my mind. But when the art gallery reached out to me, I asked them, hey, I have this background, because at that point he didn't know. On my social media, it didn't say I was an inmate or I was a cannabis. It just said an artist from Manhattan Beach.
Wow.
And then I spoke to him, and he was like, no, it's just cannabis. And even though there's a ton of blow in there now, right? But he was like, I don't think you have anything to like, you're not like this, you're not a criminal in the sense of like violent and sex offender and a robber and, and so he's like, just embrace it. And through like me embracing it, it's just been like really cool to kind of like know that, there's a huge future, it's like, an art is something that's global, so I could eventually be huge in an entirely different country.
Absolutely.
Maybe, all of a sudden it's like, oh, Sin's just huge in Japan. And so it's just really kind of cool to do forward thinking and try to like achieve some of that stuff. And just kind of like, as I know that I've already put in the time as like almost like an outlier, putting in like the like Mr. Miyagi putting in the skills as the karate, and now I'm here to like, I'll take on any other painter, you know what I mean? Like, you know, and I just try to like, when I look at the premier top guys that are really, you know, successful making art, I'm kind of like, I'm coming for them, knowing that when people hear my story,
Yeah.
I got you. You know what I mean? Like maybe I'll be.
No one has your story. No one has, like,
right.
That's
like anybody, and very much there's people that can, you know, do art better than me, but it's the story that encompasses it, and you're able to say, oh dude, let me tell you about this piece, and you're at your pad and you're smoking and your buddy, and you're just, and then they're just going to be like, no way, that, you know what I mean? So it's just something that's kind of cool. And so now I kind of embrace it, and I just kind of want to create a similar type of entrepreneur success with it, you know?
absolutely, dude. I think that's so dope. I think that, because that's really what, you know, is, you know, I thought, I love the story, because the story is something that no one really, I think, else can compete with you on that. And you're only going to get better in skill, and your work is amazing, by the way, too. If anybody listening hasn't seen Sin's like work, it's really dope. I think it's super dope.
I'm trying to do things that people haven't seen, you know, like, of course there's cartoons that have, you know, people doing blow and cannabis, but like even now I'm doing one that's a narco series, and it's so time consuming, so I can't just pump them all out because it's not computer, it's all hand painted. So I'm doing ones where like, when we see TV and they're about to, you know, take down these guys that are, you know, coming on the cigar boats, and the helicopters are flying in, or they got the submarine. So maybe there's art like that exists through like jokes or comic books and stuff, but I don't know about like fine art that you would find in a museum or your house, that it's literally like a submarine coming in with blow on it, you know, like turned into like street art or pop art. So I'm starting to try to do like a narco series, and I'm doing one right now where this dude is like, he's laying on a pillow of cannabis on the back of a boat, like, you know, as if like he just made it in smooth sailing. And because it's cartoon, I can kind of show, normally those would be concealed in concealed apartments, but because it's like satire, I can kind of show these sort of things. And I think it's cool to tell those stories now with like, in a like art that is done with brushes and spray cans, and, you know, not like a computer art, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no, and I think going back to your idea of like the trap art, I think that's a really dope idea. And I mean,
You know, I was thinking when I was telling you too about, you know, trying to be an artist, and even like this vision before I left prison, I would oftentimes, the guy that had the hobby locker directly next to me was a phenomenal artist, much better than I am. And he would only use like pens, and he used these really like high tech, like drafting pens and markers, and would create these insane characters. And he would just look at me doing like Monopoly stuff, right? And he would always just say, oh, that's junk, and that's garbage, and that's horrible, and no one's gonna hang that on their wall. And then I was just like, you'll see, you know what I mean? And we would kind of like battle. We were friends, you know, like we would, hey, let's get some, you know, you want my candy bar? Or, you know, like we would share and be friends, but at the same time,
kind of talking trash.
Like, but he was like sincere, because he actually was like, so he was
a
on
purist, he was
a young kid in his early 20s. He was on an ecstasy charge case. And so we just didn't see like things the same, because he was kind of young, and maybe, you know, and he was also more trained through art school. I think he had been to, so he would tell me like the colors I'm using are traditional with our art school. And I was like, dude, art is art. And you know what I mean?
Art is art. College is now a waste of time too. College is a scam nowadays. So let's be honest. Like,
so
but I get it. He like, feels, coming from like that background, and like, this is the way you're supposed to. No, not. It's art, dude. Yeah.
And then, you know, it's a trip is like, people would also like look at me, inmates, before I left, and probably think, oh, this dude's just going to go out and get a construction job and never do this art. Right. So then I kind of started like reporting back to like some inmates that I was cool with, like, hey, I sold this painting, I'm doing that. And then I was like, hey, make sure you tell like the guy next to me, like rub it in his face now that I did, you know, these paintings and stuff. So it's been pretty cool, the whole journey itself, you know, and I just know that it could be like so much more, and it's cool to kind of, you know, aspire in that direction too, you know?
Absolutely, dude. I think for sure. I mean, the fact that it's only been 2 years since you've been out, pretty much, that's just shows you. So how did you sell to like Floyd Mayweather? I mean,
so yeah, the Floyd Mayweather connection was, I was actually arrested by the federal government at Floyd's. I shouldn't even say, because they always tell me don't say, he doesn't, you know, but somebody that's like closely connected. I was at their property. And so through that, it's just kind of like, you know, they always said, you know, they kind of rode with me through my prison term. And they always say, like, they have the story of the feds coming to that house. And they'll always say, like, I'll never remember that day. Like, every agency you could ever think of was there. They had, like, you know, I think it was like DEA, FBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, like even the IRS, like everybody. It was like this, even though it was a spur of the moment, like takedown, it wasn't, they just happened to stumble on my location and kind of like, they waited like a day and then they hit me. But so that's my connection to Floyd. And they always kind of, through my incarceration, still had their relationship and said, when you get out, I'll bring you into, you know, our entourage, and, you know, things are going to be okay and you'll get your life back, type thing, you know? And so sometimes when you look, so the government, you know, took everything from me, you know, they have a lot of seizures. And so when I got out, you know, I literally didn't have anything. It's kind of like starting from, you know, from the beginning again. So this person kind of, you know, would reassure me, when you get out, you know? And so Floyd's birthday came up and they were like, hey, can we do something for his birthday? And it just kind of worked out. And I did it like really last minute. Like, they called me on a Friday and said, oh, the birthday is tomorrow, you know, we'll put you on the list, come down. And then I was like, well, I think I could pull it off, a painting, you know what I mean? And so ended up doing it, and then it was cool. So then I've done one since for the following year for his birthday. And it's just kind of been, really kind of cool. And since then I've got my artwork into like Dame Dash, for if those who don't know, is kind of like the legend, pioneer of Rockefeller Records with Jay-Z's partner. And then Tommy Lee has a cool piece that he just got this past year, a few months ago. It's pretty cool one. And then this recent one was with Ice Cube. Wow. So it's cool, you know. I love to just be out there and when people get stoked on it and say, oh, I love it, or this, and so that just helps energize me, you know. And you know, through like COVID and other things in life, you know, everyone's struggling with these topsy-turvy, you know, depressions, and how do we, you know, juxtapose with society and what's going on, you know. And so for me, I just it's pretty cool to kind of be able to do what I'm doing, and it's almost like I don't know. I guess I lost my. No, dude, it's something that. Question there.
Yeah, no, I like you know, it's a passion of yours that, you know, it also involves entrepreneurship, and then, you know, also like, you know, your story helping others, you know, your art helping other people, your story, you know, helping other, you know. And
for sure, I do some prison genre like YouTube channels to kind of tell my story. And I have noticed, you know, not knowing that I was setting out to do that, but those channels are helping people to try to like not do recidivism, you know. So there are people that kick drug habits, right? So oftentimes, you know, I'm not going to claim that I'm doing this huge like service to people or inspiration, but you know, there's handfuls of people that say, hey, you know, I got off drugs because of this, or you're inspired me to make art again, or I love your story of being, because oftentimes inmates prior to their release, or even once they're released, they feel they're set up for failure, that society,
they kind of are, you know, like
through background checks and not being able to, you know, potentially have the jobs that, you know, had they not had that blemish on their background, you know. So for some people, it just, you know, it gives them something to look forward to, like, man, I can kind of do this if I just, try. And I sometimes, even in looking back, I read a Russell Simmons book, and I don't know if you know who he is, but so I read his book, and he talked about you can be anything you want to be, and like I always thought, no, you can't do that. But the way he wrote it, it was so articulate. You absolutely could, if you instill it to somebody at the right age or whatever it is they're doing. And it's the same with the book, The Outliers. If you put in the time, eventually you'll get to where your goal is. If you're going to be a lawyer, you'll be a lawyer. You just have to do it every single day for 5 years until, or whatever.
Have that diligence. Absolutely. Yeah. And, I feel like you're one of those people. I mean, I think there's, anybody can do it. It's all mindset, definitely. But you're one of those people, I think, when you put your mind to something, you're going to be successful. You're obviously an extremely smart cat, I mean, like, like I said, keep going.
Oh, I was going to say, it's kind of like when I had the mindset prior to leaving San Pedro Terminal Island, how even the guards knew that I was like trying to be an artist, and they knew, and shipping out this artwork, and, will he make it, will he not, and if you set your mind to it and you go for it. But I also backtrack. Some of that is just, to me, I'm a Christian, and I believe a lot of it has to do with, God's,
fate, your path.
God's plan and faith. Yeah. So totally. But
absolutely. Have you? So we're gonna probably wrap this up.
So I learned how to paint while I was in prison for cannabis, and that's, since I've been out, I've just strived to be a painter.
Yeah, and I think it's an amazing story, dude. I mean, and I'm so hyped that you came on, because your story is one of the most, I have 10 different scripts that, like, that I've just recently, I've been working on, and out of all 10, I was like, oh, this is the person that I wanted to start with, because your story just stuck out to me, and the ability to interview you too it's been amazing.
When I do these interviews, I sometimes think, like, man, these guys are the feds setting up cameras. Especially, have you seen, there's a show recently that on Netflix, or it's the Monopoly one. Did you see where the mob took over the McDonald's Monopoly lottery? And
no.
They infiltrated it, and they started...
Oh yeah. Well, you talking about the one on HBO, the whole documentary?
Is it HBO? Yeah, I think it's
HBO.
It's
the that story is fucking nuts, by the way, too.
Yeah. So what? They did interview. They came and they brought cameras and interviewed people that fucking turned in their bogus lottery tickets. And I was thinking, like, sometimes going into these things, like, man, these people, like, they're fucking interviewing me,
Oh, dude, that cover story was pretty insane. For people that don't know what we're talking about, it's called McMillions. Yeah, just look it up. Yeah. It'll make sense to you if you don't know what we're talking about. But
it's so funny. But these people will do anything, bro. I mean, they'll show up like as videographers. To like.
And it's a great cover, Loki. You're literally
an influencer. Yeah, like these dope dealer influencers. Next thing you know, they got the feds fucking interviewing them, and they think they're what do they call those, public figures?
Yeah. Okay, do we get him? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's just funny. I sometimes, like, that's PTSD, full on. I 100% have PTSD. Yeah. Like when I look around parking lots, I'm like, dude, that's a guy.
Paranoia PTSD. Because I remember for myself, it got pretty bad. Like for the very end for me personally, and I couldn't even imagine what you paranoia. But like, you start to like think like you're getting followed, and you're like, no, you're not. Like but for you, I'm sure that like, I mean, it was pretty nuts, because the whole helicopter story that I remember hearing about, that one that seems like paranoia central.
That's an interesting one for your followers, real quick. I don't know if you got time. I was in Chicago. Absolutely. I was traveling in Chicago, and I had done like a rental, almost like an Airbnb. Wasn't a hotel, and I rented it for the entire month, and it was like on the 14th floor, and they had a concierge in the lobby. When you go in, and I started noticing people in the lobby that just seemed to like sit in the couch lobby area for like hours. Like, why? Like, if you're waiting for your person to come down, you're not going to be in the lobby 3 hours later. So I started seeing things, and I'm always aware anyways, right, of my surroundings, doing what I was doing. And so I had this corner unit to a high rise, and it had a balcony, And I was on the balcony, and I had about 3 or 4 people over that I did business with in Chicago. And I think like a load had just come in, and I might have had some in there just hanging out, my pilot or whatever. And so, ironically, we're on the balcony, and a helicopter, like if I'm facing you how I am the camera, a helicopter their nose was facing me on the 14th floor, just hovering, like we're like face to face, like how we are now. It was like the glass bubble of the helicopter was on my balcony just staring. And I was like, and I finally was like, yo, dude, everybody in. And I started taking the curtains and pulling the curtains. And I was like, did you guys just fucking see what I saw? And they weren't really on my level. People oftentimes thought I was paranoid, but after looking back in my case files and the extent of the investigating, you know, for sure they go to these types of things. Yeah. Like one thing that is with my backstory, the federal government made a fake party for me on a $5 million yacht.
I was going to ask you about that. Yep.
Just like the movie Donnie Brasco.
Yeah.
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 And it was so weird that it's like literally out of the movie.
Yeah, that's pretty insane. So that story is pretty, well, first of all, just real quick, the helicopter at the 14th floor, that's definitely the feds, bro.
Yeah. I mean, it was like so close to the building, and it was.
It just seems like comical, bro. Like,
yeah, it's kind of like Goodfellas, or was it Goodfellas or Casino, where they ran out of fuel on the golf course, and the feds went running by the backyard of his house. Oh. Like it was that same shit. Like they just don't even care. But you know, like I learned through the federal system, some crimes the government will let you know. Like they'll knock on your door, like white collar, like wire fraud and bank. Sometimes they'll knock on your door and be like, "Hey, how's it going? We're checking you out." But you know, with like some of the drug stuff, everything's incognito. But sometimes I think they're just like, "Fuck it, let's get the shot we need." You know what I mean? Or I think with that property, I rented it, and it was just for 1 month, and it was a vacation rental. So I think once I went into the building, I disappeared to them. And I think it was huge for them to figure out, where is he going?
Which room you were in, I think, probably. Yeah.
So I swear, I think they're like, dude, we got it now. He's on the 14th. Like the helicopter was like looking for me to see where I'm going in the building.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's exactly what it is. Yeah, I think it was, they wanted to identify what exact room you were in, because I've seen in other cases that's a specific thing, is they lose the person they're following once they go into the building. Yeah. And then so the story about,
I mean, I've even seen him like following me around like shopping malls. I've been in,
how
like,
obvious
Ohio.
Were they?
Yeah.
How obvious were they? Like, were they, you could be like,
oh, it was pretty obvious. Like I would do things to shake them or try to do things, and then you would notice. And there was a time where I was in Ohio, and again, I was pretty high up in my hotel room, and I was looking out my hotel window, and at the time, like they used a lot of Ford Explorers, and there was a Ford Explorer backed in, and you could see right through his windshield because he was backed in, and he had the walkie-talkie that was like this big, and he wouldn't lift it above the window right here, and I could see, I was like, from my viewpoint, it was like right here, and I could see him go like this and like talk into it. And it was like the weird, but those things, I still didn't stop. I made moves and did things where you would think like, dude,
that kind of, yeah, that's where the addiction thing kind of comes into, right? The kind of,
I think it just comes in, maybe, you know, like I was kind of like a sociopath or an addiction or, you know, like oblivious. I don't know, like, you know, maybe I had a struggle with some mental, you know, disability at that point with not stopping, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think people really need to understand, like, dude, selling like it is highly addictive if you do it long enough. Like it's highly addictive.
Yeah,
because there's so many facets. I think it's like 4 or 5 addictions put into one, really. Like, you know.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. So
yeah, and then okay, I got 2 more questions. So I'm interested about that party, and then I want to talk to you too about NFTs, and then we'll wrap it up. So that party was pretty insane. I mean, they literally did a whole party, $5 million yacht, and just tell that story, because I want to.
Sure. So a friend of mine in Atlanta didn't know that he had like the feds had knew who I was, and through him talking about me, he had an informant that was on him just buying on low level, right? So his low level informant like stumbled upon who I was and started reporting back like, oh, this is who he's getting it from, and they kind of went up the ladder. Well, then they started using my associate, you know, and him not knowing he has an informant, to like invite me places. And one of the things they said was, hey, you know, can you come to this party in Florida? This guy's this big, you know, they kept using the.
Okay, so his battery just cut out. We're probably gonna battery just cut out. We'll be right back. We'll be right back. Hold on, folks. And we're back.
Gotcha.
We're back.
That was good. I actually needed a restroom break anyways. And this,
perfect.
Okay, so if I could kind of just get into a little detail about the fake party that the feds had set up. So what it was is a friend of mine, and they kept using the word cartel, and they want to meet you and do business. And then I kept saying, you know, I don't want to meet anyone new. If you want any more or anything, I'll just, you know, give you anything that you might want, you know, like if you want 100 more or 200 more, then, you know. So anyhow, he was real adamant about, you know, making, you know, me like want to meet with these people. So I think they finally came up with an idea, you know, let's host a party and just invite them, because I kept declining on all the attempts to do business and meet with them, right? So then I think they came up on the premise of like, they said they had like a party once a year for all of his clientele in Miami and wanted to invite me. And so the guy, he didn't know he had an informant, and he kept trying to influence me and saying, hey, you know, let's just go to Miami. It'll be fun. It's a party. And so I finally agreed to it, and I made my way down to Miami. I was actually kind of like hanging out up in Atlanta at the time. And I went down to Miami, and the feds had orchestrated this entire, they had a house that was actually on the water, on the ocean. And in the backyard, it had a swimming pool, and then it had a $5 million yacht, like on the property itself, like docked into the backyard. And so when I checked in my hotel, they even offered like, hey, you know, we'll get your room. And I almost like felt like kind of offended, because at the time I'd made, you know, lots of money, and I was like, oh no, I can pay for my own type thing. And so eventually we went in a limousine, and it just kept kind of like going in circles. I guess the party wasn't ready, you know, they weren't ready for the show. And they picked me up in a limo, took me to this party. And when I get to the party, in the driveway, there's like Bentley, like other high-end cars. I know it was either a Rolls or a Bentley. And then so I'm there in the limo, and I have like 3 other guys in the car. So there's 4 of us. And one of those guys is like a known informant within the FBI. And then the other 3 of us, we don't know, but I'm like suspicious and suspect it. And so once we go into the house, all of these, you know, when you go into a house party, it kind of centralizes around getting a drink in the kitchen and stuff. And so I remember being in the kitchen, and all these people were kind of introducing themselves, and they were all of these areas that I was dropping cannabis in, like, oh, I'm from Seattle, I'm from Detroit, I'm from Vegas. And I think that was to like get me to initiate into like, oh yeah, right on, dude. And I sell bud there. And, you know, but I was kind of apprehensive, because they just kind of like seemed like
kind of fake. Just
yeah, they didn't have the swagger of a real street guy. It's kind of like, you know, like our parents that are trying to be cool. It kind of just kind of struck me as that, you know, and they didn't seem like they were like myself, you know, they seemed like they were trying. And so I didn't really, I don't know if that was going through my head, like not interact, or I just didn't, you know, I didn't say, hey, yeah, I'll hook you up with bud. And so anyhow, the party continues, and they ordered belly dancers. And so like a couple belly dancers arrived. They did some belly dancing in the front room. And there's literally like probably, I don't know, 15 people at this party. Like it's pretty,
it's
you
like,
know,
this is small. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's like, I don't know, 3 girls and, you know, 10 guys or some shit or whatever. It was not very big. And so then they had like catered food, and almost like waiters in the backyard where the pool was. And then we ate dinner, and then they're like, oh, the sun's going down. Do you want to get on the yacht, you know, and hang out?
Quick question. Do you think that all that stuff was just civil forfeiture, or not civil forfeiture, but like shit that they had confiscated from other drug dealers? Or
I would say, you know, percentage wise, a very high probability. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
And so I go to this house, and even the house was, you know, it wasn't like a palatial mansion, but for the property, the layout of being on the ocean, pretty incredible property, you know? And so, and who knows, I guess maybe Miami is like a big federal area. Why lure me all the way down to Miami? Like, it was this whole invite me down, and like I didn't happen to be in town. You know what I mean?
it was kind of cliche, like you know, like, or like,
and that's
from
the movie
movies.
Pasco. They like lured him into Miami. I like, how like textbook is it that I should have known I'm being lured into Miami?
Like, I could just imagine these feds just sitting around a table being like, dude, remember Donnie Brasco? We could do that.
Let's get him to come down. Hey, doesn't fucking Bill have the yacht? Can we still use it? Let's get Sinister on the yacht. You know? And so, man, they sure did. They got me on a yacht. And so they said sunset, and eventually get on there, and I'm on there with my friends. And one of my friends, he's like in a corner all night, like, you know, just this girl's in his ear and he's in a girl's ear. And I remember like even grabbing some trail mix that was on the bar and like throwing him to get his attention. Like, dude, like, you're not seeing what I'm seeing. You know, he was just compass in this conversation. And so he was like, out of me, like, you know, telling him or confiding in him, I think something's off, because I suspected it before I knew about my case, you know? So I go to one of the guys there, and we all generally smoke like a blunt oftentimes, you know? And so, and I was telling him, hey, you know, these guys are all cops. And he's like, oh, you're just paranoid. And I remember this specific story, and I tell it on often, you know, YouTube. So, but for those of, you know, don't hear it. So I told him, I even said this exactly. This was like long before I went and got busted. I said, let's smoke right now, and you'll watch. None of them will smoke with
it. Yep.
It was like, bet. And so I remember we kind of went, it was like a double, triple decker fucking boat, you know, it was by no means like this little thing. And so we're on like the top floor, and it's like where the boat, you know, noses to the very front. And so all these agents were kind of like horseshoed around. And I was literally like sitting on the bow of the boat on these pads. And I remember having like a blunt and offering it to every single like 10 guys that was right there. Like, and every single one of them said no. And I'm just thinking, how are these like dope dealing cartels? And I've never seen no one pull out or go to the bathroom doing blow. I know the signs of people like touching their nose and their hyper, you know, their pupils. Like, I know these things. And I'm at a party where everyone somewhat seems like somewhat sober, like they're barely doing like a beer or
like
two.
They're
beers.
on a job almost, right? Like they're
and it's like, you guys are not coming across as like dope dealing fucking monsters of the universe. You know what I mean? Like, we're on a $5 million yacht. We're dope dealing cartels. We should be living that life. Like,
we look like it, but they're not acting, you know, like.
So it just turns out that whole entire venture was completely, you know, start to finish. And it was funny that one of the agents that they introduced me to, an actual agent, he told me like in the beginning of the night on the boat, he was like, hey, let's not talk business tonight. You know, we'll talk business tomorrow. Let's just party tonight. And just like the way he said it, kind of like so corny. And so then the following day, my friend starts calling me at the hotel, like, you know, like 10, 11 in the morning, 9, whatever it was, saying, hey, come down to the hotel, you know, lobby. Let's get breakfast with this piece of whatever, right? You know, this other agent. And his name actually was EJ, was the agent. EJ, right? Come down to meet EJ. And I was like, no thanks, dude. You meet EJ and you tell me how it goes, you know? And then they kept like pumping it up, like, oh, dude, he's got to fly out of the country, and he's got like these big plans and moves going, and he's just penciled you in, and he came over, and And I'm just saying like, nah, no. And so one of my friends had come in from LA, and him and I ended up going to the swimming pool, and it had like a bar and everything. And it's relatively early. And by the prior conversations to my friend saying that this EJ guy had to, leave and go on these trips. I like the last phone call that I got from my friend, I speculated in my mind or assumed that EJ left. So he's like, hey, where are you? And I was like, oh, I'm at the pool, dude. So here comes EJ and the other guy. And he's like, oh, yeah, you wanted to talk to me? And in my mind, I'm thinking, not really. Like I've been trying to avoid you. Like actually, like if you only spoke to the person how I speak to the person who's telling you, every conversation is, no, I don't want to meet you. You know what I mean? Like, but so then
pops out of nowhere kind of too, right? Like,
yeah.
I thought, yeah.
And then he like reverse psychology. Oh, you want to talk to me? And I'm thinking like, no, you know what I mean? But that's how the dude put it. And so anyhow, we go to this off to the side of the swimming pool bar, and the guy has full body wire the whole time, and he's pretending, like soliciting to me that he's a money launderer, and if I give him like over a certain amount, we could be in the ball game together. Hold on a second.
Yep.
Sorry.
You're good.
That's what I didn't put the no. I thought I put no notification, but I think somebody hit me on a different app. So yeah, so that was the end of that. And
so he was like, I want you, give me $1 million, I'll launder it for you. What did you say like that? Like, what was the?
Well, as I was proceeding with this guy's conversation and kind of like him explaining like what it is that he does, and I unfortunately I did the wrong thing, and I got into the conversation with him when I should have just said like, nah, I'm cool. But I actually did try to at one point say, I'm good and no thank you. But I said it in the wrong way by saying, I already have somebody that does that for me. But through his like soliciting, he was telling me these ways that didn't seem like like money launderer would do. And he was like, well, you give me the cash, I put it into this account, I bounce it off this country and that country, and then I give it back to you on a debit card, all clean and tax free, and you got your money. And then I started asking him about like money pickups. Like, okay, so if I have money in Detroit, who picks it up? You, or you have an employee? And he was like, no, I pick it up myself. And so I'm thinking, I just spent the night on a $5 million yacht, Rolls Royces, and you're this money laundering. Like, who are you to like pick up? Why wouldn't you have like a?
Don't you have like 100 henchmen to like, like go? Yeah.
Exactly. So I remember asking him that question, and I said, that's weird because I would never do that. I said I would never. And so I'm thinking like this guy's supposed to be like, I'm thinking like he's providing a service that he's better than my money laundering skills because he's soliciting me, and I'm thinking like, man, like that doesn't seem like the right way to go about it. And then I said, well, where do you take the money from once you pick it up in Detroit? And like, oh, I go on the airplane with it. And I was like he's like gonna schedule a flight on Delta with like a 300 grand of my money. Just, you know what I mean?
You got to claim it at 10, right? Like, which is like, yeah.
I was like, sorry, I'm getting some messages coming through. So anyhow, when the guy started doing all that, I started just being like, yeah, I wouldn't do that. And it just seemed really weird, like so amateur or just like not very thought through, And even in that moment, I thought like, this is like, and I didn't know the difference between like federal agent and like law enforcement. I just thought like, this dude's a fucking cop, like this is, but I still, I didn't get out, which was, like my fault. But it's a weird thing that these people do and the extremes they go to,
Yeah, dude, like the amount of like money, effort, resources that they just like put into like that, like it just shows you like, I mean, I personally think they should just make all drugs legal. There always will be a legal market, but yeah, dude, but like the amount of effort, time, like it seems like having that kind of job would be kind of like first of all, like, it's just hilarious to me the way you like this story. I'm gonna clip this story specifically because this is so funny to me. It's just like such a typical like Fed thing to do. Like, just be so odd, like, you know, like the like I just, but like, if this is their job all the time, like, seems kind of fun. I mean, you know, I would never want to be a Fed, but like, bro, you're just like, it's like you're literally. It seems like just such like a round, like, I don't know. It just seems like,
Yeah.
just if you look at if you look at it from like a, you know,
like if you
perspective. Yeah,
I kind of understand where your thinking is with that. Like even if you looked at the whole movie Donnie Brasco, if you look at Johnny Depp's character, like for him to have done that was like lame, being, you know, what he did. But for people that are into that sort of thing, like it is kind of like interesting to infiltrate and do these things and to have that job for those people that like, you know, that kind of stuff. Me on the other side, we think those people are like the worst.
fucking asshole. No, yeah, and they are, but it's just like, and more so for me, it's just like, I just like look at it from a broader perspective, and I'm like, bro, like you much like waste of time, effort, resources this is. Like,
Sure.
there shouldn't be an illegal drug market in the first place, really. But nah, but just this whole story of just these Feds just being like so obvious.
Yeah. Trippy.
Like, no, dude, I'm not trying to talk to you. Be like, bro, where did you just come from? I thought you're supposed to be on the other side of the country right now.
Yeah.
Shit
Very very like easy to see in some cases, you know, like for me, I was always aware of like, I look for extra antennas, extra dark window tint. But now, you know, 2021, like these people, I'm sure it's all changed. I'm sure they drive Lexuses and Range Rovers, and you can't ever tell, you know?
Yeah, I'm sure they probably evolved into, yeah. Okay, before we wrap this up, I wanted to ask you, do you know about NFTs?
I do, yeah.
Are you gonna do those?
Huh?
Are you
What's the
gonna do
question?
any?
I would like to. I've been discussing it with a few people, and I kind of, before I do one, wanted it to be like a build up to something rather than, oh, I just put out an NFT, right? So I thought it lead up to something, or promote it for a few weeks, or somehow like to really make something out of doing it rather than just, you know, dumping NFTs out on the market.
I
And
agree.
the one of the things that came to mind was the Ice Cube connection. So I did a portrait of Ice Cube, and it went with the product branding of the packages of the Caviar Gold and the Ice Cube brand. So it was kind of like it was my rendition of the packaging, and through that, we were kind of talking about maybe doing an NFT with somebody else that could help drive the sales, like Ice Cube, right? And so we're just trying to figure out like how it all makes sense, and to make sure that kind of a new market that we all have our learning curve right. You know, I don't necessarily want to jump into something and not do it. I've had a lot of people that approach me to, oh, I'll make you them and I'll do this and that, but you know, what's an NFT if it just sits there and doesn't sell?
You need the
Or,
audience, which you're right about that, 100%. You need the audience. You need to have it come with an event. I think that's super smart, just to
and
what I've studied.
there's some guys I'm talking to right now that might be doing a traveling NFT art show, and it's going to be like the first one of its kind. And they've asked me to participate. I have images, of course, that I've created, but I haven't launched one. Another guy had made me like a sample NFT, because I'm not like a computer guy with like minting and, you know,
They're not.
change.
It's not that hard to mint, actually. Like,
Yeah,
anybody can really do it. Not
it's
anybody.
just
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
you know, with sometimes in today's universe, we got to figure out how do we best, you know, manage our time. You know, do I want to spend, you know, 5 hours tonight and learn how to make an NFT? And, you know, so anyhow, I just kind of thought it would be better to try to do something. And another company had come to me and made one and wanted to do some Bitcoin launch, and none of it just kind of seemed right. And I feel like obviously I could do it all myself, but I do feel like I've seen other artists that kind of do help like a driving force. So I thought it would be cool if we could have like some music featuring Ice Cube, the artwork, and then potentially do other things, you know, with, you know, kind of keep keep the progression of things on that caliber rather than just an artist randomly releasing stuff. You know, I want to try to like, you know, like maybe through my story, seem like we're, you know, anything I put my mindset to, like kind of go bigger than, or how big can we go in my bracket as an artist? Because I'm not Banksy or anything like that, you know? So am I really going to sell out, or how many? So
well, that's super smart of you. Yeah. Sorry, keep going. You just want to,
I just want to make sure that I don't come off like lame, I guess, you know?
Well, you just want to make sure they sell out, right? And you're so right about having you obviously, I mean, that's super smart of you, I think. When's the Ice Cube thing coming? Like when's that?
That actually is kind of like
under reps, or
it's kind of, we're talking about it, you know, and it's not something that he's agreed on, you know. It's like my friend that does business with him. It's more him and I kind of learning our process before we figure out how to completely move forward with it, you know?
Absolutely. Well, you know, this episode I'm doing on you, you know, maybe test it out if you combine it with that and advertise like, you know, 5 NFTs. I don't know, throwing it out there, because I'm starting to mess with it too. But you're right about having the driving force be. You need to have a driving force there for sure.
Because here's the thing: like anybody can make an NFT, but can you sell it? You don't. I myself, I don't want to have NFTs that just like lay stagnant on the market, or nobody buys them, or feel like that I'm not successful. You know, and I want to do something, and not necessarily like I'm going to sell out, but I want to know that I didn't just like, you know, do something that didn't hold up to like where I'm trying to be as an artist, I guess.
Absolutely. You know? Well, I think you just need to get them sold and then start the ecosystem of it. Cause it's like, and you control the limit. Like, you know, if you were just to put 5 out and then you put the smart contract in where you would make money on every
blockchain.
Yeah. So you would want to just sell them, and you wouldn't want, you know, it doesn't need to be for an insane price, but it's really cultivating the ecosystem of how do people, you know, other people buy them, right? You know what I mean?
That's how that one guy that just sold at Christie's,
69 million one, which
Lipo, or what's his name?
I can't remember. Yeah, but
that's the what his strategy was basically essentially what you're talking about, releasing them and then allowing them to like trade up. And so what he was doing is he's releasing a bunch of them for free. I think 1 a day over the course of like 3 years. And so that created like, he's kind of a staple within the community because he's been doing that. But essentially he has so much out there that people may not know that an NFT, the person still continues to get residuals on existing sales, where in the past, let's say you're an artist like a Banksy or somebody, and they sell something to yourself as a private party. Then you take that to Sotheby's or Christie's and you make a fortune. The artist doesn't get that anymore, you know, previously. Now through NFT, they're creating a capability where the artist can indefinitely still continue to get paid. So even if you're releasing stuff with not much purchase value, you're kind of hoping that 10 years, 5 years, it'll trade like people trade collectible like baseball cards or something of that nature.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would keep, I would keep them pretty decently limited, but like also too, like, you know, like you were saying, have it connected to a product. So that's already like them buying let's say you do like a limited edition, like clothing drop with your designs on it, and then like maybe like a limited edition cannabis. And then you just do a package deal, be like, okay, it's 300 for an 1/8 and this dope sweatshirt, and you get the NFT with it.
Yeah, that's pretty good too. Like Ice Cube could actually do that because it's a legal brand. You know, he can offer his brand in addition to like an NFT. Like they could get, you know, a whole like package or something, you know,
and then put in the contract, like, let's say somebody doesn't like, they don't claim it after, let's say, like, I don't know if it's possible, but like they don't claim it. They don't go online and claim the NFT that was part of that whole package deal. Then you just take that back and take it out of circulation to limit the supply. But
yeah, no, I definitely, I definitely want to do them. Some people are saying that the market's already kind of like, it was at its, you know, it's like a bubble and it's trending and now it's kind of going to pop. But I think if I try to do like forward thinking, that I think that this is like the future, how we eliminated, cassette tapes, CD players, DVDs, like essentially this is another form of eliminating, like, okay, so people that collect, high-end art, let's say Picasso's, Warhols and stuff like this. So those collections can be pretty bulky. And if they're just a collector for the money value, how do you even store that and stuff? So now you have something that, and with also you have all these crypto millionaires that don't know, it's like new money and they don't know where to even put it. So it's kind of like an all new game, even on the currency level, like when we talk about exchange rates, it's almost like a different form of customer, right? And so there's a lot of new millionaires within the currency, community. And 100%. I think all of that is pretty huge.
Yeah, and dude, and the timing of that is perfect, because you want to know why. Like you want to know, a decent amount of those crypto millionaires, where they got their crypto from? The dark web. And art like yours, with the story like yours,
sure,
people, yeah, you have a whole community, dude. And like that's what really, for me, like because I've really started to look at NFTs quite a bit, and your specific offering makes the most sense out of a lot of them that I've heard, because you have the story, there's people that are going to identify with that, and you're an artist, it's a perfect storm. I mean, in my opinion.
I just wish I had gotten my story onto, a broad platform, like let's say, where somebody sees it instantly, like a Jimmy Kimmel or whatever, where just instantly millions are aware of it, like Tiger King or something, right? Then I just think that the fan base within the community of what I was doing would be huge, and then that would obviously be a huge driving force in NFTs and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
It's kind of, I don't know where all of this potential, there's so much potential there, but and it's also, to backtrack, it's very hard to do things like starting over, like myself, and working on like minimal, budgets, and trying to, decipher like how do you best reinvest your money,
Absolutely. Well, I actually might know a couple of people that I'm going to talk to you about this, because we'll talk about
NFTs. Cool. Yeah. I'm always interested in, even you and I have corresponded through our DMs. Like people, oftentimes, like I think they figure people that have followings or whatever, they're not going to answer their DMs, and they probably don't, maybe. But I actually do. I spend a few minutes and I'll hit people up and communicate with them, and I just think that I forget where I was going with that, but
yeah. Well, I just know that, like, in terms of like your story and like getting I know some people that specifically that are connected to pretty big production companies.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, but no, you're right. But you're accessible though, and
that's, I guess, what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. No, which is good. I mean, it's that's the beauty about the internet age, dude, is like, you can hit up anybody, anybody out there. Well, dude, thank you so much for your time, man. This was such a treat for me personally. Like, this is one of my favorite podcasts I've ever done personally. And yeah, dude. I
enjoyed it too, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, 100%. And when I'm down in LA next time, we'll have to link up. So where can the people find you, by the way? I'll put your Instagram and stuff, but like you have a website or?
Yeah, so I do have sinistermonopoly.com. Unfortunately, me being a painter and the person I am, I'm not that savvy with having all of my products on there like 24/7 and updating it. I know I need to get better, but I have some products on there, and eventually I'd like to get more of, what I offer on there and various things. But it's hard, a lot of people, they want, oh, hey, Sin, can you get clothing? And it's really like, well, even when you're talking about NFT, there's this whole juxtapose with doing anything, like even with like kind of, I guess, art, in general, there's, are you going to do series? Do you do clothings? Do you do collaborations? There's so much, and there's so involved in so many aspects of things. It's like, sometimes it's hard to just be myself. And so now I'm starting to realize that, I just recently moved into a larger, workspace. what I'm doing is going to start requiring more like
build a
employee.
team. Yeah, I need to build a team.
And so ideally I want to get to those places that, you know, that like the NFT drops and, but it's hard sometimes to get there. That's going to take a minute. I do look at other artists, you know, there's artists that have huge sponsorships with like energy companies or car brands and stuff like that. And I don't know if my artwork is too like edgy for that, or if it's just that, you know, hey, I'm kind of new on the scene and I just need to be patient, you know?
I think you just need to be patient, dude. I already know a few people off the top of my head that yeah, dude. I think you're gonna crush it, bro. I think you're gonna change the world with your art, dude, personally.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a buddy of mine who is actually, I think it's okay to talk about it because, you know, they have some press releases, but my friend is filming the Von Dutch. You're probably pretty young to know about the Von Dutch story. It's a clothing brand, and it was huge many years ago. Like they had these like the trucker hats, and it was kind of Audige and Ed Hardy, and kind of like when all that clothing started happening, and very interesting things that happened. So anyways, my friend he got him a deal with the Hulu network, and he's kind of, you know, doing his thing and saying, you know, hey, I'm hoping that when mine's done that I can kind of, you know, maybe bring you in. And I just sometimes kind of hope that, you know, things of that nature will happen organically or through, you know, faith in God, that if something like that were to happen, then I just know then the art career is just, you know, sky's the limit type of thing, you know?
It will, dude. I promise you that will. I promise you, dude. I swear. Like
I mean, even if not, you know what, bro?
It will, dude. I'm telling you, it will. I promise you, it will. I'm one of those people though that say that, but like I'm rarely wrong ever. I swear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right on. That's good to know. And but yeah, people say that sort of stuff all the time. They're like, oh, it's incredible. It's a story. It's a book. And I remember even being incarcerated and just sitting in like a cell, and my bunkmate maybe was on the bottom bunk and I was on the top, and we can't sleep, and we're just talking about our times on the streets, you know, and almost every cellmate would be like, dude, you're like, this is a book, you know, a movie. And I even had one cellmate that was like, he was probably like 75, and his while you're an inmate, you have like hustles to make money, and he would do court documents for people, and he would you know, type their stuff on the typewriter. So he started saying, you know, hey, let me type up, you know, like a movie script or a book or something, and he started pushing me to do it. So every day he would come back, you know, like from lunch or whatever, and say, hey, do you have a few pages? And I slowly started like writing a script. So I know like people have told me, you know, hey, it's pretty incredible. Sometimes because I lived it, I don't really like, it doesn't seem like that, but I do. I am.
Yeah, the weight of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, man. Well, I think it will, man. I think it's dope. Well, thank you so much again. Really, I really appreciate it. Yeah, guys, go check out his work. Really appreciate you guys, whoever made it to the end of this episode. Anyways, this is the Frame of Flower podcast, episode number 37, with the legend Sinister Monopoly.
All right. Hey, and sometimes what I tell people when I say goodbye is I tell them, hey, suck it easy.
Suck it easy. There we go.